What's wrong with women's rights in Iran? Just give us an idea. Like, is there lots of things wrong? Is it just the veil? What's going on?
What's wrong? Where to start? I think one of the most important things that is wrong in Iran is that the contrast that Iranian women face of absolute freedom around the revolution, in the start of the revolution, and absolute suppression that they felt after that. I have lived in Iran, I come from Iran, and I experienced the revolution, and knowing from my own experience, but also research that I have done about Iranian women activists during the revolution, I know that the most devastating aspect, what is wrong with women's rights, is that women between 1979 and 81 experienced a kind of freedom because of the protests and the revolution. Before that, the suppression started. So the freedom was not absolute. In the beginning it was, because there was all possibilities for political parties, to political groups to present their work, and there were discussions on the street. And I remember I was 17 years old, 17, 18 years old at that time. And for me, experiencing that much freedom after years of suppression, it was amazing. You could read, for example, and discuss about Marx and Lenin, and people were quoting Quran or Lenin. Can you see the contrast? So that was a kind of freedom which was very empowering for women. And then you feel freedom, and then you experience absolute suppression. That women were said to go back to their homes, and so the contribution to the revolution was done. And so next to political suppression that they faced, as any other political activists at that time, they faced extreme kind of suppression as women, because all the law in favor of them were abolished. So,
can you name some examples?
For example, one of the things was they didn't have a right to apply for a divorce. They didn't have any chance to have custody of their children. So all this family law, which was before time, although somewhat limited, but still protected women, and it was in favor of women, that was abolished. And then they started also to make the veil obligatory for women. So at that time, it became actually obligation for women to have headscarves.
When did that start, actually? What year was that?
I think it was 1981. I remember because we started, there were lots of demonstrations in the streets of Tehran and Iran, actually, in all streets, against the compulsory veiling at that time. But I remember that the first, it was even in 1980, 79 even. Yes, that was the first big, large demonstration. And I remember, because I was a leftist activist at that time as well, or supporter as a young girl. And I remember that it was said that women's rights would be solved when we have the leftist revolution. So many were in a doubt to support this kind of demonstrations or not completely. So there was also our own doubtfulness that in a way helped maybe the regime to pursue with this kind of anti-female, all these things they did on non-female friendly law.
You want to add something? Yeah, I think it's. Do you want to add?
If you have more to add, are there other examples of discriminatory law or social injustice to women in Iran that we should address?
Actually, Halleh fortunately make a general image of what happens in Iran, but I want to add the only things that actually our women movement, Iranian women movement in region, in Middle East, is one of the oldest and most important movement in the Middle East, because maybe we can compare this with Egyptian women movement, because the women movement in Iran started in constitutional revolution time about 200 years ago, by, for example, to asking for the right of vote, to asking the political participation, to asking about the education. But before that, if we want to focus on freedom and emancipation and compulsory hijab, the main talk of this panel, I have to remain the name of Tahir Qurratul Ain. Tahir Qurratul Ain, more than 200 years ago, start to talk about freedom and equality for women. However, she is a member of Baha'is minority, religion minority, but there is a discussion among the feminism that some of them that say that since Tahireh was Baha'i, the fond of the equality and the fond of emancipation and, for example, unveiling people. But according to the research, according to a lot of story, however, if she was a Baha'i, but since she's talking about freedom and liberation of women and equality, okay, she is the start point of women's movement, no matter, nevertheless, she is Baha'i or not. The start point of talking about
so that's already 200
equality,
years ago,
exactly,
you say, yes.
Exactly. That's why our Women Museum, the start time of the research, because it's a research. The exhibition is an output of this research. The research time starts by Tahireh because according to researcher and women study researcher, the start point is from Tahireh. So after revolution, during the constitutional revolution, the discussion of the discourse of freedom and liberation flow of the society, of the women movement but there are always a lot of limitation because of the traditional, because of the authority of clergy in Iran. But in 1314, I think about 100 years ago, the first Pahlavi forced people to unveiling, forced women the unveiling.
Reza Shah.
Reza Shah.
This was in the
Pahlavi.
30s? When did he do that?
1314
40s. So in the 40s, he actually forbid to wear the veil,
forbid
right?
to wear. Look,
so this is,
you know, I want to...
Between the two wars,
I want to make an image of the problem of the women movement. Always they are a challenge about the movement, about the women. Focus on her body, focus on her rights. Some governments, some kings, some shah force them to veil. Some force them to unveil. Some, you know, it is always the object of the challenge for power relationship, for the state, for government. So after Reza Shah unveiling, forced unveiling, but anyway, before that, the women start this. It was not from Reza Shah. Reza Shah make it as a law, but it was a lot of women's wants to have this. Anyway, after that, in the second Pahlavi, this harshment law is a little bit moderate, and second Pahlavi make the optional. Those want to have hijab, those want not. But, however, he claimed he is a secular state, he is a secular government, but he is not, because, for example, on that time, the heritage, the heritage between men and women was not the same. Or, for example, polygamy, it was legal for having two wives together, it was legal, but it was a condition. The condition was on the permission of the first lady, first woman, the man can, you know, it was not exactly secularism. It was still influenced by Islamic law until revolution. During the revolution, the women young and old, as me, as Halleh, as everybody, most of them are here, try to be, but you know, we had thought, okay, with a revolution, we can reach the emancipation. But only 1 week. 1 week after revolution, there is an order from, it was an order from the leader of revolution, آقای خمینی, Mr. Khomeini, that started to abolish of family law and also oblige hijab, compulsory hijab for all of the women. It was the biggest march and biggest demonstration in the story of Iran on that time, 8th March of 1979. The women went to a street to demonstrate against this compulsory hijab and also family law. They were successful to postpone this law, but unfortunately, after 6 months, everything has been changed, and all of the right, the women tried to have it, to access it from the constitutional time until Islamic Revolution. They lost them because of the Republic Islamic law about the women, discrimination of women.
After that, though, when did the women's rights movement, like the modern women's rights movement, sort of rise up? When did your movement evolve, became strong? Was it already in the 80s, 90s? After the revolution, I mean. When did you sort of pick up strength?
After revolution, actually, it was a very dark time. From 1982, from the start war between Iran and Iraq, and the mass execution and the arrest, the mass execution, mass persecuted the opposition people. It was about 10 years gap from 1981 until the mass execution in 1988. I can say nothing has happened in the term of movement, civil society activities. Nothing has happened, except in literary, and we can talk about sometimes, one other times, why literature. On that time, it was the time of literature and cultural activities, because nothing has happened. No. Nothing has happened in 10 years. But after by reformist time, before reformist time, by changing something in the world, for example, the fell down of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union, the fall of Soviet Union. Sorry for my broken English. I'm confused sometimes. But anyway, something has happened around the world, and Iran influenced by this changing. And a new government before reformist time came, and little by little make the background, the ground for example, relieving the reformist time. And on that time, reformist time, I can say that the mainstream of women movement is appeared. However, during the 10 years, there are some underground activities. For example, we had some very small group to watch the movie about feminism, but in a very, very secret place, because it was a crime to watch the movie about feminism. Or, for example, we made a group, only women group, to talk about the people they are executed, the mother of these people. There are some some separated group, but there is no collective and public issue until reformist time.
So that's until,
Exactly.
let's say, the
From
end of the
reformist
90s?
time, sorry?
At the end of the 90s, so 98,
yeah.
97, 98,
Start
the movement really started.
Yeah.
And how did it evolve then? How did it change? How did it become a movement? What did you do? What did your generation do?
My generation.
What did you do? Because you did many things, I think.
Okay. No,
Please take the mic.
yeah. Actually, if I want to say, the first, let me say something. In the beginning of reformist time and before the reformist time, some women from the governmental body, close by government, by position or by relatives, they had this opportunity to go outside of Iran to attend some international conference, international event, and they understood that something is happening around the world. It was 1994, the Beijing, the 95, the conference, Beijing International Women Conference in Beijing, and it was the first time the governmental women wanted to attend this conference. So they were looking for the other NGO, for the other women activists from the secular part, to make this tableau, to make this figure satisfied for the world. So they came to us. How they find us? How they did find us? Because on that time, for example, we were member of environmental association, children's work association. The people who denied to work as a women activist, they attract to other activities for children, for example, publisher women association. There are several association and NGO, and we divided. We meet each other, we recognize each other, but we didn't tell to each other, oh, you are the same. For example, you are in another. Nothing.
Yeah.
But by face to face, only by some smile, or by oh, you're here. Yes, I'm here. And we started to work as a civil society member because we want to do something, but as an NGO, not as a governmental body. So they came to NGOs. They came to NGOs and asked to please adorate to us, affiliate to this group, because this group wants to go to Beijing plus 5, or Beijing, and 1995. Sorry, and anyway, it was the start time to combine the governmental women who fight for equality, even though in the frame of government, and the women, non-governmental women.
So did the government, in a way, strengthen the women movement in that way?
Not governmental. I don't understand.
Well, you say that you were invited by governmental women to participate.
For example, there are some office in the Ministry of Foreign Minister, for example. In Foreign Ministry, there is an office, women office. In educational ministry, there is an office, women office. In this women office, as a small part, as a women representative of a small part, wants to come to other women outside of this organization. And some of the women activists say, encouraged and yes, encouraged this relation, some not.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
was.
May I add something because from the other side, because I was at the Beijing conference, and that was interesting. So to see this same movement from two sides,
Yeah.
because when I and Farah, I know that she was also very active, preparing for the Beijing conference. So what I saw there, and that was very interesting for me. After the Beijing, I wrote a paper because I was quite amazed by what I saw. I saw governmental people. You say governmental, but it was actually in the part of the NGO conference, which many people, many women who have been from inside the system. You would say the daughter of a clergy, a very important clergy. Halleh Ghorashi was there, the daughter. So they were inside the religious Islamic frame, tried to address the issue of women's rights. But they wouldn't use the concept feminism at all. They were against feminism. But they were still trying to find as I try to analyze it, they tried to find their own space as religious women in that religious revolutionary, frame. Because they, as I talked to some of them, so they mentioned Mansoureh, for example, Mahbouba Abbas Kholizadeh at that time was there as well. Mahbouba, who made the film of Mehrang Zikar, she told me later on that, I was exiled as an Islamic activist as well, because when I was part of the Iranian Revolution as a woman, I was thinking that I will get also some space as Islamic women, because I was an activist. But then I was also told by my husband or by the clergy to go back home. So I felt betrayed too. So for them, they started also to claim their space, although their space was very deep. The claim of the space of equality they fought for, they were thinking more of equity instead of equality. So they were talking about the kind of their role as a complementary to men, but still having their own protected lives in a way. So they were not, their story was quite different than secular feminists, certainly. But still, they tried to create some space in the system. So they came to Beijing, and they prepared quite well. I was quite amazed. They knew all the documents, CEDAW documents, the document against discrimination against women. They prepared everything because they wanted to impress the 30,000 women who were there. But then again, also women, Iranian women from exile, from Sweden, from Germany, from all over the Europe and US, they came as well as a very fanatic, anti-Islamic activists, feminists. So there were, in every session, there were Iranian women, there was huge fights. So all between these two groups. So they were shouting at each other all the time. And then that was interesting that there were some people from Pakistan and India, they were like, what is going on here?
That's the Iranians again.
And they were shouting against all these prophets and Muhammad. There was really using bad language. And these women, believers, and still consider themselves feminists, they were like, what is going on? It was really, for me as a feminist, it was also very interesting to see the tension there, but also to feel the eagerness of these women to want to be part of this larger women's movement. Only they couldn't really connect to the language of feminism. But what happened again, what I realized later on, and wrote more about that later, is that being part of that conflict and facing and experiencing the spirit of women activism, the feminism, or 30,000 women. Can you imagine what can happen? China was very afraid of revolution. So there, the power, they experienced that power, and that changed them. They radicalized them in a way. Because some of the women who were there with the black chador, although they said they were obliged to do that, I'm not sure, but still, they became secular feminists later on. So, but it took 10 years or something, but people changed. And that, I believe that being part of a movement, being part of this solidarity about women that connects them on special issues that are women issues can create change. And that I felt there as very much. So from the other side.
So can you also maybe shed some light on what strategies or tactics did the women's movement, like after Beijing, maybe in the 2000 onward, start to deploy to fight against?
You have to say something from Iran because it's
from
a
Iran.
question
From Iran. So what kind of tactics did you do? Did you just keep on meeting in little circles, or did you actually go outside?
Before starting to talk about Iran, let me say something about Beijing.
No, we have many things to say. No, we need to pass Beijing.
No, because it is very important. On that day,
very short.
Beijing is very important. It's a very important point in feminism history because from that conference, they decided to use feminism with S. What do you mean? You have never seen socialism with S, Marxism with S. Nothing is S, only feminism with S. Because of these challenges, Halleh said about it. Because they accept that pluralism, they accept the diversity, and diversity without S never ever happened. S with feminism is the result of the challenge of the discussion between Islamic and non-Islamic feminists.
Okay.
It was the point of Beijing for me. And
so after Beijing, what happened? Just give us an idea. What did you do? What was happening? What was going on in Iran in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Actually, it was a very important era because, you know, the exchange, the communication, the conversation between Iran, inside of Iran and outside of Iran started, and there are a lot of women study professors who left Iran in the revolutionary time, and we didn't have any benefit to know about them, to know about the theory, to know about the books, and you know, they started to send us some articles, some, for example, books, and I have to mention the role of the Nimeh Digar, it's a magazine, and also the Foundation of Women Study, Iranian Women Study Foundation. Each year, every year, since 28 years, they arrange, from that time, they arrange a conference combined with Iranian women study and activists inside of Iran and outside of Iran. You know, this little by little, the theory, the action, everything close each other to learn a new way about what is the feminism. Feminism is not a bad word. Because, you know, before that time, everybody say, I am an activist. I am believed to equality, but I am not a feminist.
No. Because feminist was really like a bad word, right? In Iran,
because you're thinking about it. Because feminism, you know, nobody knows about the feminism. Feminism was something very far from the culture. But from that time, particularly when the governmental women knows about this, because they were the mainstream in to distribute the discourse or something like this, and they came to us. And the most important for me, it was knowing and recognizing the importance of institutionalization. You know?
Institutionalization, yes. Of feminism.
No,
yes.
you know, because we understood that because of the NGOs, because of the civil society, we have a lot of activists without any space. This space was the NGO, and these NGO made a beautiful bridge between government and society. And it was, I think, it was the start point of changing the opinion about how we can do struggle, how we can organize our struggle to fight against how we can, who is our target group. If we want to change the law, who is our target? The government is our target. We can't talk, for example, with the other planet to talk about, no. You know, we find the modern meaning, the modern meaning of the movement. What is the movement? The modern movement based on the demand. Demand is for daily life. Daily life needs the institution. The institution, what is the role of institution? You know, step by step, we came from the sky to the land and stand, and still standing in this land to ask for our daily life, daily rights. It is the process of modernism, if I can say.
Yeah, but of course that's not without danger. I mean, what are the risks of women speaking out about women's rights, demanding their rights? We, of course, can see it in the exhibition, but can you just tell me, enlighten us a little bit about what can be your punishment if you do so?
How can I say everybody knows?
No, not everybody knows, I think. I mean, I think it's important
yes,
to tell
yes,
what
because, you know, now we are living in an era of social media, era of information. You know, there are a lot of things about every country. I am here and I am sad for example, what happened in Nigeria, what happened in Syria, what happened in, for example, what is happening in Turkey. Everybody knows about the other countries' problem, and we are human rights defender. We have to stand for all of the world, not only our own country.
Yes, but let's stick to Iran now, because that's the topic of tonight.
No, because you know, of course, each. Let me say an example, very popular example. For example, in Iran, say, maybe in every country, say, imagine, for example, a woman or a man has two lovers. One is rich, but without very good mentality and not intellectual. And one is poor, but with a lot of knowledge and possibility. If you choose each of one, you have to pay a lot of cost. If you choose the rich one, you lost the intellectual life. If you choose the intellectual one, you lose the the good life, the relaxed life. So the struggle is something like this. The struggle is a choice, and for each choice we have to pay cost, and the cost could be prison, could be being a diaspora, could be being jobless, could be being die, but it's a cost of love, and nobody claim about this cost. If as I know our activists, as I know the other activists from the other country, I don't like to talk about punishment, prison, torture. There are a lot of books about this. I want to say we pay the cost of love.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's, that's a beautiful. And I think what is important also to consider that a lot of this love is shared with others, with men as well in Iran, because what I have seen happening in the last, from 1990s, when, for example, some of the magazines like Zanaruz, for example, Zanaruz was a magazine that when I was a young girl, that was we would say very non-intellectual magazine. It was about, it's a kind of magazine that, you wouldn't really call intellectual. But then in the 1995 or something, women started to write articles there challenging the Islamic frame. And also, I remember that there were also even a clergy who was writing the name of a woman and criticizing Islamic, law, and, from inside, criticizing and claiming the space for women from inside the Islamic frame. So at that time, the punishment for secular women or leftist women to say something was death. They couldn't say anything. They were silenced, absolutely. But then at that time, Islamic feminists, the word is already challenged by many, but still people who tried to claim feminism within the Islamic framework, they were very important. Later on, you see that space, claiming space, and also challenging the space, making it bigger and bigger, made possible that many women joined from different backgrounds. So what you call feminisms happened in Iran, plural kind of feminism, and men also became very much part of this Solidarity Act. And we see now that it is, the women's movement and women's rights is not only fought by women, but also by many men of different generations. So, and there are different campaigns of men also supporting women. So that makes it also, when you have the larger the support system, the more possibilities of, claims, and the less severe, I would say, kind of punishment, still very severe, but,
And let's also go to, because of course, that also addresses the question, like what we can do from the outside, for example, to support women activists inside Iran. What can you do in the diaspora? What can we do as NGOs like Amnesty International? Because we have Nils Mollema here, who has been working on Iran as an expert, and you have done several campaigns for women's rights activists.
Yeah, I mean, Amnesty obviously has done a significant amount of work on Iran. You raised the question of what can we do. Well, with me I have two of some of the most recent examples of basically the two branches of what Amnesty does. The first is an urgent action, which I'm sure many of you in the room have seen come by in different forms for different countries. These are often targeting or for individuals. In this case, it's one that came out last week for 11 women that have been arrested for protesting their lack of freedom to practice their religion. When they were arrested, there was a violent arrest. There's medical issues that aren't being addressed in prison. There's lack of rights to attorneys, and it's unclear as to what exactly they're getting accused of and what kind of punishment is awaiting them as a result of this. So what these urgent actions are for is they call on members, but also non-members, for letter writing campaigns. And this is basically the bread and butter of what Amnesty has ever been built on, is these letter writing campaigns. And when I started with Amnesty, I know that I felt that these may have been outdated and ineffective. I have very clearly been shown that this is not the case, because these often go coupled with other types of actions. There's thousands and thousands of letters that roll in when we run an urgent action like this, but it goes coupled with some of the other work that we do, which is more at the UN level or at the member state level, where behind the scenes there's a little bit more of where we found that there is actually space also to pressure Iran. Iran for a long time was viewed as a country that is unresponsive to the international community, that there's no real point in putting pressure on them, and it's been shown in the last, at least in the last few years, that they are more responsive and that there is a reason for us to pursue these ends. For example, what I have with me is a letter that was written on behalf, or partly by Amnesty, partly by Human Rights Watch, and by, I think, another 35 other NGOs that co-signed the letter to the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, which mentions very explicitly, and it's one of the few cases that very explicitly is mentioned, it's women's rights and executions. Those are the two big subjects that get mentioned. And it cites the case of 35 women that have been arrested only in Tehran since December 2017 for not participating in the forced veiling. And they're being threatened with up to 10 years in prison. Now that all sounds very dramatic, which it definitely is, but I want to touch on maybe make it a little bit more tangible with the example of Abdullah al-Mansouri. I realize this is not a women's rights activist, but for what we can do, what Amnesty can do, and what individuals around us can do. This was a man who practiced his political beliefs, fled Iran in the late 80s, was picked up when he visited some of his Iranian friends in Syria. That at this moment, Amnesty picked up his case, started protesting for them not to send him to Iran. We were informed that prior to our protest, he had actually been moved and that this had just been done in secret. What followed was a very, very long process, which was a very diligent balance between media, letter writing campaigns, but also behind the scenes work with ministries of foreign affairs. Abdullah al-Mansouri was threatened with a death sentence. Then it came out that it may be 30 years. Then it went down to 15 years. All of this remained unconfirmed, so you have to imagine that you're working in a massive smokescreen, and each phase has its own proper response. Eventually, he was released, partly because of the role of the Dutch government. He did have a Dutch passport. He was from Maastricht, or lived in Maastricht at least. And this is a very clear case of where, okay, yes, he did end up serving 8 years in prison, which is more than he deserved for his work. But where the work of Amnesty and many other organizations, and also mainly our followers and our supporters, helped, in this case, save a man's life. And we have plenty of other examples similar to that. And I cannot stress how important it is that we need all of you to participate in that.
Okay, thank you, Niels. Caroline, to go to you. What can international justice mean for these women activists who are imprisoned, for example?
Just to warn everybody, I'm usually the loudest person in a room, so I'm not used to speaking with a microphone in front of me.
Skip it like that.
That was, thinking about that question and researching some remarks to come here tonight, I learned a great deal, and I was actually provoked to turn my thinking in a couple of different directions. And I think I'd like to answer that by just prefacing everything with a little bit of context. I also can't answer the question thinking only about the women. I'm going to talk about the detainees in Evin prison. So it's to give it context, it's not about the men, it's not about the women, it's about these political prisoners together. And I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the prison system and the detention system, and particularly, Evin, it seems to operate with no transparency. When you use the word smokescreen, I think you're exactly right. So what we have are these political prisoners, men and women who are isolated. They're isolated from other prisoners. They're put in solitary confinement. There's a practice of putting men and women in solitary confinement for extended periods, which is a violation of human rights, which is a violation of national law. They're isolated from foreign diplomats. They're isolated from Iranian parliamentarians who might visit the prison. And in fact, they are isolated. They have no access to international human rights investigators. They have limited contact with their families, if any. They have really limited contact with the outside world. So here what we have with these detainees they're in Evin, they're held in situations that facilitate systematic, cruel, and inhumane and degrading treatment. And you've heard mention over the course of this evening of a range of cruel treatment, beatings, sexual assault, and torture. So that's the context. And as I was preparing for this evening, looking at the existing options for international justice, I wasn't disappointed, but the story's not the brightest one. Look at the ICC for a minute. We all know, or most of us know, that Iran isn't a member of the ICC. So the only way the ICC might have jurisdiction over the crimes, which I'm talking about, which are national crimes, and which may, following investigation, amount to international crimes. The only way the ICC is going to have jurisdiction over those is if an Iranian indictee, someone who's been charged under the statute of the ICC for crimes against detainees in the prison, is found in a country that is a signatory to the Rome Statute. So that's one of the other ways. The only other way is if there's a referral by the Security Council. And we all know that doesn't always work. Look at the situation in Syria. So what to do? There's a very, very powerful tool, a legal tool called the principle of universal jurisdiction. And just to explain, normally, and I'm going to draw on an explanation used by an organization like Amnesty International called Redress, which deals with torture victims from all around the world and nobody else. They explain universal jurisdiction this way. They say a state is usually competent to judge crimes if they've been committed on their territory or by their citizens, right? So the principle of universal jurisdiction, under that principle, states have got the option, and sometimes actually the obligation, to prosecute alleged criminals who are on their territory regardless of where the crimes may have been committed or the nationality of the perpetrators and victims. So really powerful tool, and based on this principle, justice really has no borders if one is looking for justice on behalf of the victims of ill treatment in one of the prisons in Iran. And this principle is something that gave rise to national war crimes units all around the world. We have one operating in Holland, in France, in Germany, in Canada, in America. And these units are there to exercise universal jurisdiction. They generally investigate and prosecute allegations of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and torture. So yeah, very powerful. But when you're grappling with the past, when you're grappling with the present, when you're grappling with a system that begs and cries out for transformation, a criminal trial, international justice, is only part of the solution, isn't it? There's a really good former colleague of mine who's also Iranian, Payam Akavan, and he wrote about this dilemma in the ICC, and he said even if the ICC did have jurisdiction, the democratic transformation of a country is much deeper than what can be achieved through a trial. So what do we do? I think you keep speaking out. I think that events like this are so important, particularly in this kind of situation, because what happens in Evin and other detention facilities for political prisoners across Iran is that everything happens behind closed doors, and we don't see or hear about it otherwise. So keep doing this, build awareness, foster a greater respect for fundamental principles of international law and human rights, But also, you know what, and this is what impressed me when I was doing the research to prepare these remarks, what about investigating the cases? What about documenting the cases? And when I say document, I actually mean something more than my colleagues from Amnesty International. I mean collecting the evidence, collecting the statements, collecting the forensic evidence, collecting the physical evidence. There's right now a multitude of actors and organizations who are writing and reporting and advocating about the situation for women human rights defenders who are incarcerated under sentence in Iran, and men as well. It's available through open source, it's available through these widespread campaigns, but now maybe it's time to work together to consolidate these efforts, to consolidate the evidence, to preserve it, to analyze it, to prepare the files. That's maybe what international justice can do in this situation. Build the cases against these individuals, specific individuals, the direct perpetrators, those who may be responsible for atrocities against the detainees under recognized legal frameworks by ordering or directing or allowing or tolerating the crimes, or by cooperating or assisting in the commission of the crimes.
And is this not being done at the moment? You also comment on that? Or not enough? This documenting of the crimes against these women and other activists?
I think there has been the Iranian tribunal here in The Hague some years ago, and there have been some efforts about documenting the sorry. Justice for Iran, yes, and in London. So there are attempts, but it is very important what you say. Organizing this kind of events help us not to forget and to keep remembering. For me, it was, very, very emotional because during the opening of this event, I have been away from Iran for 30 years. And I have lost loved ones in Iran. And one in particular, which was very important in the person I am now, in contributing to the person I am now. So, but we don't know what happened to her. She is gone, she is missing. And when I came here, at the opening, I met somebody who is a very good friend of her, who was in Iran. And he told me we should build cases also for people who are missed, who we know what happened to them. And from that time, that was for me a reason to start rebuilding a story around the memory of her. And we were meeting for Iranian New Year, my family in Georgia, so coming people from US, from Iran, so we get together, and I started the investigation there, just to recap the memories of her by my family. What do we remember? 30 years, 35 years ago. It's a long time ago. So just recapping and interviewing, and I would make a project out of this to interview people who remember her. And by remembering and reconstructing a life story that we easily maybe forget, not in our hearts, but remembering also something about people who gave their lives for something more than daily lives. They had ideals. Maybe we don't share their ideals anymore in that heavy, high idealistic level. But still, we have a way, and we have to find a way to remember them and to reconstruct their stories, so that the new generation would not forget. So I think for me it was also had a very personal aspect, this museum, what the exhibition. Yeah. Another thing that I want to add is it's so important to create support systems for women who you are not feeling safe for any reason, or do not feel grounded in any country. People who are not anymore in Iran and not landed in a new country which is called Netherlands or Germany or any other place. And these support systems are crucial. I am working at the university, so from universities, our universities and Scholars at Risk, we have heard of Scholars at Risk. So it provides great opportunity to create that support system. It has to be improved still. I think we can think about better ways and more continuous way of doing that. But at our university, Marinos is here as well from Freie Universität, who we have our own program, Academic Freedom, which connects to, we try to find different ways to create a kind of coalition, find enough funding to build this support system. And I think that I know that other universities in the Netherlands do that, and also other universities around Europe and in the US are doing this, which are very important.
Okay, thank you very much for your remarks. So let me round up. So it's documenting what is going on with the women who are in prison, showing their handicrafts, like you did, documenting what are the crimes that are committed against them, for maybe a case in the future, writing letters, speaking out, making support system, but maybe even also just documenting the memory of people that you know, that you love. So that are my conclusion I will take from tonight.